Good afternoon from Brooks River, everyone. My name is Mike Fitz, and I'm a park ranger here at Katmai National Park and Preserve. And I'm joining you from the middle of Katmai National Park. If you're not really familiar with this location, maybe you're joining us on explore.org or on Katmai's website for the first time. Kind of in the heart of Katmai National Park, and I'm near the mouth of the Brooks River. It's been somewhat of an exciting July. And today is the last day of July, and we're starting to see, less bear activity along Brooks River. So during this live chat over the next hour, I want to try to recap a lot of the events that we saw on Brooks River, maybe try to answer as many of your questions that you do have. Again, if you do have questions for me, please feel free to post those in the chat board on explore.org. So when you're watching any bear cam page on explore.org, go to the bottom of the page and post your comments and questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to try to answer those. I have a moderator, one of the fine people that work for explore.org, that will be sending me questions, and I'll be looking for that on my iPad that I'm holding right down here. So if you see me looking down from time to time, that's what I am doing. So this is a great day. We've had some pretty dark weather, some rainy weather over the past month, but today is bright and sunny. I might get a sunburn over the next hour or so. But I think, while we're standing here, and while I'm waiting for a few of our questions to come on in, we should probably talk about the whole phenomenon that we had here in July. We had bears here, in the middle of June, looking for fish at Brooks Falls, and that's about the time when salmon start to arrive in Brooks River, is about mid-June or so. We had a few trickle in during the month of June, and then right around the time where we usually expect the peak numbers of salmon, right around very late June and the beginning of July, the salmon just weren't here, and we were kind of, everyone in this region was sort of like scratching their head wondering what was happening at that point in time. The state of Alaska, the fisheries biologists who manage the commercial fishery out in Bristol Bay, which is where these salmon come from, they're coming from the Bering Sea in Bristol Bay. They forecasted a huge run this year. They forecasted about, something around 50 million fish coming back into Bristol Bay this year. And the run was really slow in coming. So it was really odd that there weren't any fish at the right time. It turns out that they were just late in coming. So a lot of the fish came, but it was a little bit later than normal. Maybe that's why we're seeing some bears sticking around the falls later than normal. We've always had some bears around here at the end of July, but 11 bears at the falls within my line of sight last night, that seems to be kind of a lot. So maybe the later run and the size of the run too. It was a very large run, helped to keep bears around for the time being. We've had many mothers and cubs in this area. Many of them have been seen on the cams. I think a few of them were seen just not too long ago. Today there was, of course, 435 Holly, her adopted 2.5-year-old, and her biological yearling that was here. We had, of course, 402 with 4 spring cubs, 4 new cubs, and those were, and the mother of those 4 cubs, that was the bear that abandoned the cub that was adopted by 435 last year. And we've had several other mothers and cubs seen in the vicinity over the past couple weeks or so. So lots of mothers and cubs around this year, maybe a little bit more than last year, but that happens to come and go. It's been very interesting to watch the dynamic up at Brooks Falls to see which bears are, still maintaining their high level of dominance, which bears are still, kind of creeping into the hierarchy, trying to find a place. We had a new bear that we've never seen here in July, a bear that was seen here in the fall, but never in July, show up just a couple weeks ago, number 775. And it was very fun to watch him try to find a niche at Brooks Falls, learn to fish at the falls, challenge a lot of other bears, and maybe even in his desperate hunger that he had when he first showed up here, jump off of Brooks Falls and a lot of those belly flops. So many different things happened here during the month of July. Before I get to your questions, I really do need to mention that this is the time of the year where bears begin to disperse from Brooks River. We're not done with bear cam season. Bear cam season is definitely going to go on as long as the batteries and the sun up here down at the river can power our solar panels, and as long as it can power the repeater up on Dumpling Mountain to send the signal to the rest of the world. But August is a time when bears go to many different salmon streams across the area. There are a lot of salmon still in the water, and there will be salmon here throughout August, but the migration really is stopping right now. And when the salmon stop migrating, Brooks Falls really becomes a bad place to fish. It's maybe no better, and it may be a lot worse than some of the other streams that are in the area. So bears will disperse to a lot of other streams where salmon are accessible, and some of those streams are maybe only a few feet wide, so salmon fishing can be pretty easy at those other places. At the end of August, though, the spawning activity in Brooks River really picks up, and a lot of fish spawn and they begin to weaken and die. And as that happens, bears will come back to Brooks River, and peak numbers of bears in the fall really happen around the end of September, early October. So we can expect September and October to give you a lot of good bear watching on the bear camp. So we look forward to that. We look forward to seeing which bears come back, what their cubs are doing, and just to see how fat they are, because they do look a lot different in September and October versus what they looked like in the beginning of July, when they had not had any fish meals for 8 months or more. So that's just a little bit about the phenomenon that you can expect to see over the next month or so. Bear camps will still be live throughout August, so please do be looking for any bears that stick around. We might have one or two if we're lucky this year. You never know what else is going to show up. We could see some river otters, we could see some wolves, we could see some moose. You just never know. So please keep watching, and we'll see what comes our way. So I know that there's a few questions in my queue here, and I'm sure there's probably many hundreds more on the chat board. But the first question that is here for me is, as the first part of 2015 winds down, what surprised you most so far? Sort of what's been the highlight? You know, and I guess that's a tough question to start with. I hadn't thought about any surprises, and well, maybe except for one. I was surprised that 402 came back with 4 cubs. A litter of 4 cubs is not unprecedented. We've seen that here before. In fact, you know, I was going through our bear monitoring database earlier this month, and I found that there were 4 other litters of 4 cubs plus 402. So we've had 5 total in the past 15 years here at Brooks River. So 4 litters is not unprecedented. However, that's a big litter, and especially I was surprised that she came back with 4 cubs, because she went into, you know, estrus at sort of a weird time of the year, and she had that yearling cub that she was caring for up until that point. So if you're not familiar with that story of the abandonment of the cub and its adoption, a very brief recap. 402 had a yearling cub last year. She basically abandoned it, went back into estrus, and that's an unconscious physiological process that they go through. 402 didn't have a choice in that matter, but she basically weaned the cub at a very strange time of the year. July is not a time of the year where we expect cubs to be weaned, and that cub was a year younger than we expect most of the cubs to be weaned. So it was on its own, and it was walking around here running the gauntlet of Brooks River around all those other really big bears. And it got adopted by 435 Holly, seems like maybe in late July, early August, and we got to see her come back with that cub in September and October last year, and we've got to see them running around Brooks River here during the past couple of months, which has been really exciting. So that indicates, you know, the 4 cubs, to get back to the main question of the surprise, that seemed to surprise me, just because it's uncommon to have 4 cubs, first of all, but it indicates that 402 had a pretty good year. I mean, she was a really big, fat, healthy bear. She was a real porker last year, so I guess that 4 litter, or that 4 cub litter that she had indicated somewhat that she was a very healthy bear. And, you know, there's been a lot of highlights. I can't say that, you know, one stands out amongst the rest. I've had some really great opportunities to watch some of those females with cubs right down below me on the wildlife viewing platforms here. And I think I went to the falls virtually every night in July. I think maybe there was just one night that I happened to miss. And that was because there was bears at the bridge here and I couldn't get across. So I went up to Brooks Falls almost every night, got some really fantastic opportunities to watch bears doing interesting things. Got to see a lot of those stories that I was following from years past continue this year, seeing that there are certain bears like 856 that are still very dominant. Seeing new bears that are coming in, it's always interesting to watch new bears and see how they interact with the known regulars up at Brooks Falls. And even last night too, I was getting some really great looks at 402 and her cubs playing and chewing on grass right down below the falls platform. So those things to me have been some of my highlights so far. Of course, the season's not over yet, so I am certainly looking forward to the time of the year when the bears are coming back in September and seeing how those stories happen to continue. So let's see, moving on to another question here. What did the bears eat in August when there were no salmon? Of course, there are other food sources available to bears besides salmon in Katmai. Bears, they may hunt young moose or caribou. When those moose or caribou are more than just a couple weeks old, though, that's going to be really, really hard for bears to hunt those animals. If they can find a bear that, a moose or a caribou that's weakened, maybe they'll hunt that. But the bears here are primarily focused on salmon. The majority of their calories are coming from salmon and marine food resources. And that's maybe the main difference between a brown bear here in Katmai and a grizzly bear in Denali or a grizzly bear in Yellowstone. Those are the same species, but brown bears have access to far greater amounts of coastal food resources like runs of salmon. They will also go and feed on berries. So we have a lot of different types of berries that will come in season in August. So bears will feed on things like crowberries, which are a very small, dark black berry. They're not related to blackberries, but that's their color. And you can find those in tundra habitats, open habitats, even at low elevations like what we have here at Brooks River. The blueberries will come into season around the end of August. High bush cranberries, gooseberries and currants. You can have nagoon berries, which are closely related to raspberries. So there are a lot of different plant foods that bears can capitalize on. On the Pacific side of the park, they're still going to be eating a lot of salmon, but younger bears and females with cubs may still be digging for a lot of clams. Here at Brooks River, I think primarily what we see in their scat anyway, and in the vicinity throughout the month of August just happens to be pieces of salmon, maybe a little bit of grass, and a lot of berries. So the bears are going to be targeting those foods. And then as the season continues to progress and bears are fishing here at the river in September, more and more salmon. If you really want to know what a bear's been doing, just take a look at its scat, and it'll tell you virtually everything about where that bear has been, what it's been feeding on. So you can be a little bit of a detective and try to figure out what animals are doing by just taking a look at their scat and trying to read those signs. So let's see here. Number 3, will the late run at Brooks River delay the time the bears return to the lower river? Have you seen such a late run before? And I don't recall off the top of my head seeing a later run like this. And it really wasn't that late. It was only about a week. I don't anticipate that it will delay the arrival of the bears here in late August and September, because the salmon, even though they may have arrived late, their genes and their physiology and their bodies, their instincts are telling them that they need to spawn at certain times. Because if they lay their eggs a little too early and the eggs are laid in warm water, they may incubate too quickly and hatch at the wrong time of the year. So the fish are timing their spawning to correspond with certain water temperatures, and especially to make sure that their eggs incubate and hatch at the right time of the year. So I think we're still probably going to see about the right time of the year for the salmon to spawn, and that's really going to start to pick up in late August and September. I don't really anticipate that we'll see a delay in the bears coming back, but I've been wrong before. So that's one of the things that we'll have to look for, and one of the things that everyone on the cams can participate in is just a little bit of this extra knowledge that maybe wasn't recorded all that well in the past. When do we see the majority of the bears coming back in September? Is it going to be at the beginning of the month? Is it going to be later this year? Is it going to be around the peak times? Is peak time going to be normal again? And again, that's about late September, early October when we see the peak number of bears here in the fall. So also, I know that there are bears in the vicinity. So if I happen to see any of those in the meantime, maybe we'll take a break from the questions and we'll just try to take a look at some of those bears that are walking in the vicinity looking for any dead and dying salmon. One thing to look for as September rolls around is bears will stop focusing on Brooks Falls and they'll look at all these eddies and side channels down in the lower half of the Brooks River. You know, this area right behind me here is an area where a lot of salmon carcasses happen to collect. So they are brought downstream by the current as they weaken and die, and when the current loses its energy, it just drops those salmon carcasses. So this is a great area for bears to fish. They'll just cruise through here like battleships looking for anything that can't swim away. So that's a different dynamic that we'll look for as September rolls around. Let's see here. A question about some sows with cubs coming up in the queue. Do sows and cubs frequently, often, or rarely adopt orphan cubs? Approximately how many instances of this occurring do you know of? And I will say that it's a rare event. I was actually very surprised that the cub got adopted last year. I think a lot of people were hoping that would happen, but you know, I've been accused sometimes of being a little bit of a Debbie Downer and saying, "Oh no, those things can't happen or won't happen or unlikely to happen," and it is very unlikely to happen. There have been some documented cases of bear adoption in other parts of North America. On Kodiak Island, it's been documented with brown bears at least a few times, but we've never actually seen that here at Brooks River. So it was very interesting, and I think all the staff here were really excited to be able to observe this phenomenon. So it's an uncommon event. To sort of get back to the question, certainly I would say it's rare. So if we were looking at something like very common, not so common, and rare, I definitely would say it's on the rare end of the spectrum. Hardly ever seen it. We've never had a documented case of that here at Brooks River. And only, I think, within brown bears, it's only been noted a few other times in different places. And another question about cubs: what advantages do cubs with siblings have over single cubs and vice versa? You know, that's hard to say. I think when they're really young, there might not be any particularly large advantages. They're competing with one another for mother's milk. So we often see the biggest cubs go to maybe the more productive teats on the female bears and push their siblings aside. They'll do that when they're older cubs as well. So there is certainly competition within larger litters, and if you're a single cub, then maybe you have all the access to mother's milk, you have all the access to the fish that maybe she's feeding on in the river, because mother really won't bring the fish to their offspring, but she will maybe let the cubs tear the fish away from her. So if you're a single cub, you have access to all of that food. So that's maybe an advantage of being a single cub. But as cubs age and they become larger, families of bears with older cubs can actually, maybe maintain a higher place in the bear hierarchy than a bear that's single and on its own. For example, 435 and her two cubs right now, they're pretty large. The cubs are behaving fairly independently right now. They're cruising around the river, they're catching their own fish, but they do sometimes work almost in tandem to get access to resources that they couldn't before. They'll approach Brooks Falls, and when they're doing so, they will pick up scraps. They maybe won't compete for fishing spots up at Brooks Falls, but they will approach Brooks Falls much more closely than they probably would if they were single, especially the cubs. Next year, do not expect to see, the adopted cub, cruising around Brooks Falls as comfortably as he is now when mom is watching his back. They've also stolen fish from other bears too. And even the 2.5-year-old has done that, because he'll approach another smaller bear, especially some of those smaller adult females that we have. And the adult female will look at him and say, "You really going to try this, buddy?" And then 435, his mom comes around right up behind him, and the other bear drops its fish and walks away and lets the family take that fish from her. So there is some advantages to being in a larger family. You have more eyes looking for you for possible threats. You can maybe attain a higher place in the bear hierarchy, but there's more competition for food within that family. So there's some benefits to that, and there's also some not so great things, some negative sides of that. So let's see here. Another question about cubs. How do moms with multiple cubs make sure everyone is present and accounted for? How can they count? And I don't know if they can count. I don't know if anyone's ever tested that. So that's an interesting thought. There have been recorded cases of cub swapping. Maybe not full-on adoptions, but just sort of like swapping going on. Not here at Brooks River, but at McNeil River. I've read some books about, McNeil River, which is another very famous bear viewing area. Bears feeding on salmon in July. So it has a lot of similarities with Brooks River here, and it's just on the northern boundary of Katmai National Park. And there have been noted and recorded instances there of two families coming together. Maybe the mothers are very tolerant of one another, familiar with one another. And bears are certainly smart enough to recognize each other as individuals from year to year, season to season, day to day. So these maybe two females came together, and for some reason, the cubs got mixed up, and perhaps more followed one female than what they had planned on originally. I think that the females can keep track of their cubs through their sense of smell. We've seen mothers and cubs get separated here along the Brooks River, and even after extended periods of time, you can sometimes see the mothers put their noses to the ground, and it's like a bloodhound just trailing a scent. The bears live in a world of smell that we can't really imagine. I think their sense of smell is perhaps a couple orders of magnitude greater than ours, at least. I mean, they really can see the world through their nose. So it's hard for bears to hide from each other because they can smell each other so well. So I think mother bears can keep track of their cubs fairly easily just through their sense of smell. But it really does behoove the cubs to stay close to mom, because if they do get lost or separated for a period of time, the mother's not going to spend a significant amount of time really looking for it. So the cub may be abandoned or left to its own devices if it doesn't stick very close to mom. But they're smart animals with a really keen sense of smell, so I think it's fairly easy for them to keep track of their own offspring. Let's see here. I'm a little actually ahead of schedule, so I think I've gotten through six questions so far, which is pretty good. Excuse me, for our live chats here. So number 7 is about our new bear, who we saw just show up a couple weeks ago, number 775. And it says, number 775, Lefty has had such great success catching and stealing salmon at Brooks Falls this year. Do you think he might change his habit and show up regularly in July rather than be a fall bear like he's been? And that's really hard to say. Sometimes we have new bears show up and all of a sudden they're here and they're adults, so they some reason have never come down to Brooks Falls. They're fully mature adults. We've never seen them before, and they just start fishing here, and they're here every year probably up until the point where they die. So that certainly has happened. We've had other bears that show up at Brooks Falls infrequently, and when they do show up, they seem to do pretty well for themselves. I think 2 years ago, number 469 came down to Brooks Falls, and he was fairly recognizable because on his left shoulder he had a diamond-shaped blonde patch of fur, so that made him fairly recognizable. So we saw him throughout the month of July 2013. We really haven't seen him back at Brooks River for any extended period of time since. And this is a place that he's been seen to inhabit before, maybe not necessarily in July, but certainly in the fall. So some bears can make a living by only visiting this place infrequently. I'm not going to say whether or not 775 excuse me, is going to be able to come back and fish here every year if he's going to try to make a living doing that. So it's a little, it's almost halfway through the chat. I've been battling a little cold over the past week or so. So I'm going to mute my microphone for a bit and take a drink of water. Please bear with me. All right, much better. Thanks for allowing me to take a brief delay from the camps for just a little bit. So since it is about 3:30 and we're about halfway through, I'll try to stick with you until about 4 p.m. today, Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. My name is Mike Fitz, and I'm a park ranger here at Katmai National Park and Preserve. If you do have questions for me about bears and the phenomenon that we see here at Brooks River in the middle of Katmai National Park, please feel free to post those in the comments on explore.org. I'll try to get to as many questions as I possibly can over the next half hour or so. And I have, I think, still quite a few to answer, so I'll do my best to try to get to those, and I'll be with you for the next half hour at least. So aside from the very few new bears that have been seen on the cams, are you seeing others that haven't been on camera, and why is it that there are aren't more bears given the excellent food sources that are here? Probably every bear that we end up seeing here along Brooks River makes it onto the cams. And in fact, you may see more bears than we actually see because there's so many people watching nearly 24 hours a day. I talked to our bear monitor, Leslie Scora, who is her job is specifically to stand on these wildlife viewing platforms and a tree stand that she has in the near the middle of the river and watch and document what the bears are doing and identify those bears as individuals and note their activity along the river. And she doesn't have a final count of bears on the river scene this month in July, but she was somewhere between 30 and 40 bears. So it's it's on par with what we had here last year. And some years in the past we've had as many as 70 or more bears at Brooks River during the month of July, and not all of those bears are here every day. Some of those bears just come through a few times and then they just happen to vanish for whatever reason. Perhaps they're not here because they don't want to try to fish around the high concentration of other bears. That's certainly a possibility. I mean, you have to compete for these fishing spots here. We don't see a lot of bears down in the middle of Brooks River right now, down in the mouth, because this is a terrible place to fish. There's maybe a few dead salmon out there, but not enough really to keep a bear busy. So you have to, if you want to fish successfully and gain a lot of weight, you have to go to Brooks Falls. You have to learn how to fish at those places. And maybe being around those high concentrations of bears is one of the reasons that some happen to stay away. They could also stay away because they don't need this place. They could find salmon elsewhere. They may be more reliant on vegetation. There probably are some bears that will eat more vegetation than others. If you're a smaller bear, you need less salmon than a very, very big bear. So they could be subsisting more on vegetation if you're a younger bear. The presence of people is probably the other major factor. There's a lot of places in Katmai that don't concentrate people like Brooks River. Brooks River is certainly the most popular place within the park. We get about 10,000 people here, and the river's not that big. It's only 1.5 miles long. So when you have upwards of 30 bears on the river and 200 to 300 people here, that creates a lot of competition between these two species. We're not competing with the bears for food, but we may be competing for them for space, and that's not intentional, but that just happens. Our presence in an area certainly alters the behavior of these animals. So a lot of the bears that we do see along the river, especially down near the mouth of the river, are very human habituated bears. They're bears that are used to our presence. They don't necessarily react to us defensively if we are near them. That's not to say that we can be close to them and still be safe, but they're less likely to react to us in a defensive manner, these human habituated bears. But not all bears get used to the presence of people. And even a person standing on a wildlife viewing platform sometimes can be, in a bear's mind, a competitor. They're thinking, and their genes and their instincts say for thousands of years that humans can be bad. Stay away. And, you know, so I could be standing up here just with my binoculars, not making any noise at all, and a bear might look at me and say, I don't want to mess with that. I don't want to come down to the area. I don't want to be near the planes that are landing. I don't want to be near the, you know, the all-terrain vehicles that we have to haul gear back and forth. I don't like to be near, you know, noisy crowds of people moving through the forest. So some bears may not come down to Brooks River at all when people are present. And that's why we have the falls platform closed to people from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. to try to give some of those non-human habituated bears the opportunity to feed there without our potential disturbance. So again, yeah, I'm not sure why we don't see more bears here. There's a lot more salmon to go around. You know, bear populations ebb and flow. It can depend on a lot of things, overwinter survival, the abundance of fish. But I think there's other factors that maybe we don't always consider. So if you are planning a trip to Brooks River, I do ask everybody to really think carefully about how you can make your experience here enjoyable and ethical at the same time. How can we reduce our impact on these animals? And maybe it is standing in predictable places like the wildlife viewing platforms, going to these places at predictable times, and just giving bears as much space as they can to go about their business. So ninth question here, are there any statistics on AWOL bears that were regulars at one time, but then go missing for a number of years and then show up again? This person, you know, says, I'm thinking about Ted, who's been gone for 2 years. What's the likelihood that he'll come back? And, you know, I could probably get statistics on that if I went into our bear monitoring database and tried to look for those things. You know, infrequently seen bears, you know, we don't have a whole lot of those. There is one that's been moving around the river over the past couple of weeks or so. And that is one bear that's not in the bear identification book that you can download off of Katmai's website. This is a bear that just, for whatever reason, I never put her in because I hardly ever saw her, and I didn't think, you know, she wasn't seen last year either, so I didn't think about putting her in. But that's number 425 Jan. She's really recognizable because right now she's the only bear that I know of on the river with pearly white claws. 435 Holly has very light colored claws, but they're more tan than white. 425 has pearly white claws, so just like ivory almost in color. So you can look for her. She's a bear that's seen infrequently. You know, sometimes for a number of years she'll come. You know, in recent years we haven't identified her coming back to the river on a regular basis. 469, who was the bear limping just a couple years ago that captured the attention of a lot of people, and people, you know, through his resiliency and his perseverance through that injury, that leg injury that he had. I think I might have seen him just once back in June. He just came down to the river, he looked, and he left, and I haven't seen him since. And I don't think anyone else has either. So yeah, we have a certain population of bears, a certain subpopulation, as it should say, of a few bears that just don't come back to the river on a yearly basis. But I'd really have to figure out a way in the database to try to tease out those numbers. Likelihood of 489 Ted coming back, I'd say he was such a regular visitor to the Brooks River from subadulthood all the way up until 2013, that if he's not here, you know, this year, I'd say it's quite likely that he's deceased for whatever reason. And we don't know. Some bears, they just happen to get sick and die. They get injured for a variety of reasons. So we're probably never going to know what happened to that bear. And he was, you know, one of the more famous bears on the river because he was so recognizable and on the cams so much. But if we don't see him this year, I'd say the likelihood of him coming back is pretty slim. But like I say, I've been wrong before. So keep your eyes out for him. I want to see Ted come back just as much as anybody else. I'm very interested in his story. Did his story conclude, or is there something else about his story that will tell us about survival in the bear world? A bear that wanders away for a few years, finds habitat and food elsewhere, then happens to come back. Again, we'll look for those sorts of stories to continue into the future. Yeah, 10th question here. When bears disperse and go off to find fish in other parts of the river, are there rangers that go out to those parts to document them, take photos? We really don't keep track of bears in many other places in the park. We have a limited monitoring study in Katmai National Preserve along Moraine and Funnel Creek. And that there. A lot of bears concentrate there in August. Brooks River bears are very unlikely to go up there. There's going to be a lot of salmon streams in between, so they don't need to hike that far, 40 miles to the north to get to Moraine and Funnel Creek. But we'll do a little bit of monitoring there each year, maybe for just a week or so, to keep track of bear numbers and maybe try to recognize some individuals from year to year. Along the Brooks River here, we don't actively go out and seek bears that were here at Brooks River in other locations. But if we happen to see a bear that we know in a different place, then we're going to, certainly take note of that. But that's not something that we actively do. There are dozens of salmon streams in the area that these bears can. Not fond of bushwhacking along salmon streams. I tend not to do that. I hike a lot by myself, but if I know salmon are spawning in a certain area, then I tend to avoid it, just to give the bears a little bit of extra room. And it sounds like there's a bear in the vicinity. Maybe we'll take a look at her, take a break from our question and answer session for just a few minutes. I'm going to try to get some more questions here. But let's take a look at, I think, 409 Beadnose, who's in the water. So this is, I think, a preview of what you're going to see in September if you haven't watched the cams before. So 409, she has very blonde ears, pretty recognizable. She's fairly habituated to the presence of people, so we see her down here a lot, even when she has cubs. Very fat bear in the fall, too. She's pudgy now. She's going to be a real hippo in the fall. So she's looking for any fish that are dead and dying. Of course, she can't swim fast enough to catch a healthy salmon. The salmon can easily swim away. So she's just looking for any fish that can't swim away at this point. So in September, you'll not only have her out there, but you'll have sometimes 14 bears within my line of sight or more. Ranger Roy, who's not joining me today, unfortunately he couldn't be here. He has said he's counted dozens of bears from this spot in the fall. So I've never seen quite that many, but in years where we have a lot of bears here at Brooks River, it's certainly a possibility to see, maybe two dozen bears or more right from the platform that I'm standing on. She's using a fishing technique called snorkeling, and that's something that bears in Katmai do virtually universally. In fact, I don't know a bear that won't do this. They'll stick their eyes under the water, look for any salmon that are laying on the bottom. Some bears will dive down to get their fish. Most of them won't do that. They'll just kind of try to pick them up with their feet, reach down with their front paws or their rear paws to pick them up. And a lot of the area out here is fairly shallow. So she's certainly swimming at points, floating in the water. But there's many submerged gravel bars out here, and those are exposed in the springtime, so we can see those in the spring. But she may be certainly walking in different places out here. All right, so while we watch her, let's see what other questions we have. Comparing to last year, What bears have you seen change in behavior in terms of maturity and fishing skills? Now, that's an interesting question. I know, some bears are very well practiced at fishing. So you'll see bears like 747 and 856, 480 Otis. They've been fishing the jacuzzi at Brooks Falls for many, many years. Very good at it. You'll see sometimes the younger bears try that and not do so well. I know that, we haven't seen this bear in a few weeks. He seemed to leave a little early this year, number 89 Backpack. He tried to fish the jacuzzi. He's a fairly young bear. That's a spot that he really couldn't occupy when he was a younger subadult bear, but he's a growing adult right now. He tried to fish the jacuzzi and he was successful there. Number 32, who's nicknamed Chunk, he was at the falls last night, so he might be still around today. That bear actually is trying to fish the jacuzzi and get good at that spot. So that's a difference in their behavior and their fishing techniques that maybe we didn't see in the past. For two reasons. They were a little too small to occupy that spot and fish it successfully, and their size also didn't really allow them to compete with a lot of those other bears up at Brooks Falls. So those are a couple of examples that I can think of. You should look for, as we have, the bear cams continue into the indefinite future, we can really, I think, get a really great understanding of when bears become fully mature, when they reach their peak level of dominance. Because, bears like number 89 and number 32, they're not quite there yet. They still have a lot of growing to do. It seems like bears that are very, very dominant and very large, like 856 and 747, are in their mid-teens. So when we see number 89 and 32 in their mid-teens, it'd be very interesting to see how they fit into the hierarchy of things. So 409, she's still out there. It looks like maybe she did find a fish because she's stationary. And I'm not sure how well you can see that. But there's another bear coming into our line of sight at a place that we call the Gravel Bar. And that looks like another adult bear that looks like maybe number 868, who's an adult male. Both of these bears are fairly habituated to the presence of humans, so they're not necessarily bothered by the noise of airplanes. And but that is, again, like I mentioned before, a big difference that we see along the river. Certain bears that aren't used to the presence of people, aren't tolerant to the presence of people, will not come down here to fish when planes are active, when people are active. They may not come down to this area at all until we happen to leave in the fall. So as we watch 868 swim out into the mouth, next question here. A year ago, 503 was wandering around Brooks Camp, not catching fish without a mom. What were your impressions of him during that time? Do you think he's developed over the past year? What are your predictions for him in the future? Well, I don't know if I want to predict anything for him in the future. I'll say that much at least. Because there's really no indication, some behavioral trait or characteristic that I can see in cubs and subadult bears that indicate they're going to behave in a certain way in the future. They may be situated to the presence of people, then we would expect those cubs that are around people having benign experiences with people, that they'll carry that memory of benign experiences with people into the future. So as adults, a bear like 503, since his mother is habituated to the presence of people, we would expect her, that cub 503 to come back as an adult and maybe not be as intolerant of our presence. So that's maybe the only thing that I could predict for him in the future. But as far as like being a real dominant bear or anything else, I just can't say. Last year when he was on his own, I would see him doing his thing. I'm gonna point the cam back in the right direction here. and he was avoiding other bears, trying to, make a living, but he was acting kind of normal for a very small 1.5-year-old bear. So he was doing his best to survive, but he couldn't, really gain access to fishing spots at Brooks Falls, running a gauntlet of very large bears that pose threats to him and his survival. So his behavior last year, I think, during that period of time was quite normal. But after he was adopted, he seemed to become almost a little bit more confident in what he was doing. And that's normal for cubs. Older cubs, they seem to behave confidently because mom is watching their back. He also seemed to be maybe a bit more well-fed because he could follow 435 Holly, take fish from her. She was very tolerant of him taking fish, and still is. And also, being more well-fed, a little bit more energetic, and also a bit more playful. Those two cubs, the adopted 2.5-year-old and Holly's biological cub, the yearling, they do play a lot with one another. So that's something I think that we can look forward to in the fall when they're well-fed and they're down here at the mouth of the river. The question about bear denning, do we know if the bears return to the same den every year? Here in Katmai, we don't think that any of them do. Other places in North America, bears will den in rock crevices. They'll den in hollow trees, especially black bears. They'll sometimes den right underneath, a fallen over tree. They'll use the upturned roots as a little bit of a shelter. Here at Katmai, though, the bears they excavate their dens. They basically dig straight into the hillside. And there's a video of me floating around on the internet, crawling into a bear den, and I'm sure many of the regulars who watch the bear cam have that bookmark, so they can probably post it in the chat for other people who want to watch it. So they basically just excavate into well-vegetated, steep hillsides at slightly higher elevations than what we have right here. So they're going to go up into the mountains just a little bit. Average elevation, maybe, I can't remember off the top of my head, 1,200 feet, 1,500 feet, somewhere in there. Most dens were below 3,000 feet in one of the surveys that was done here in the 1970s looking for those dens. But they're not known to reuse those dens. Those dens probably collapse over the course of the summer. So, yeah, they're not reusing dens. They're excavating a new den each year. And some questions from some third graders. So I'm glad that you can join me today in your classroom. Do bears take food into the den with them? Do they venture out of the den during the winter months? So a couple different parts to your question. Bears when they go to their dens, they're done eating. Everything that they're going to survive on is on their body. It's all that fat that they're building up from now until October and November when they go into their dens. Their hibernation process is actually really fascinating because you can imagine trying to live off of just your body fat. We humans would not be able to do it. You would dehydrate fairly quickly. You would get very hungry very quickly. Bears, when they go into their dens, their whole metabolism switches and they can feed themselves and hydrate themselves just off of their body fat. So they don't. And the other thing that they don't do when they're in their dens is they don't pee or they don't poop. So they're not doing anything but just surviving on that body fat. They're recycling any waste products into their system to keep their muscles strong and also to keep themselves hydrated so they don't pee in the wintertime. They're not bringing any food with them to snack on later in the winter. But if they are disturbed when they're denning, they will sometimes leave the den. And sometimes even in warm spells, they may not be, sleeping unconsciously throughout this whole period of time. They're sleeping for most of that time, but they may rise, they may, stand up and shift positions from time to time. If they're disturbed near their den for whatever reason, let's say a vehicle flies by or people are nearby and they're noisy, then the bears may leave the den. They may go right back into the den, or they may try to find another place if the disturbance is too great. So we try to stay away from areas where bears are denning in the wintertime because we don't want to disturb them at a time of the year where there's no food available to them. So they're not bringing any food with them, but they may get out of the den if they are disturbed, or if there's a warm spell and they just want to stand up and look around. And that happens especially in the springtime. And what triggers hibernation? Kind of a follow-up question associated with that. Is it sunlight that triggers hibernation? Well, it's probably a few things. Lack of food is one of those major reasons that bears will start hibernating. It's probably also day length. Just like us, bears have these physiological processes that their body just does unconsciously. So in the fall, their circadian rhythms start to change, and they become towards when they get closer and closer to the point where they do want to go into their den, or when it's about the right time to go into their den, they'll become sleepier. So yeah, I'm sure day length has a little bit to do with it. Lack of food has a big part of it. If there's a lot of food around, then they may stay out of the den even longer. But going into the den and hibernating, that's their best energy conservation strategy. They're not going into the den to avoid cold. They're not really worried about that. They're big animals, they're very tolerant of cold. It's really the famine of the wintertime that they're avoiding, because there's no vegetation really for them to eat. They're not going to be able to hunt down moose or caribou at that time of the year because they're going to be too healthy too quick. So the bears are going into their dens and hibernating because there's just not food around for them. And let's see, 16th question here. I'll see if I can get to about 20 here. How can I volunteer at Katmai? Or how can I help the park from home? So there's a couple different ways that you might be able to do that. Each summer here at Katmai National Park, we do have volunteer positions. If you're looking to get maybe an internship, working, as a ranger, as an intern ranger, we have positions advertised through the Student Conservation Association, and you can look for those jobs to be advertised in the wintertime. Sometimes we try to throw those out December and January. Volunteer positions, we also try to advertise around that time too on volunteer.gov, so you can look for that. We try to advertise the positions on our Twitter feed, our Facebook page. I'm looking over my shoulder, and I don't think you can quite hear it, but 868 is just right next to me. I want to show you that while we talk about volunteering. So look at those two websites, thesca.org, thesca.org, and volunteer.gov for those different opportunities. We're also, looking for contributions to our wiki page. And again, many of the BearCam regulars can post a link to that wiki. It's just something for camera viewers to contribute to, so we can keep track of everything that happens here in the BearCam, because myself and Roy, we really don't have time to write down everything that happens every single day, but the cam viewers can certainly do that, so you can post on the wiki page. So those are a couple different ways that you can help. Supporting national parks, bear conservation, I think those are some of the best ways that you can that you can help from home. We don't necessarily need snacks sent to us. Do not do that. We've gotten snacks in the past, and we certainly appreciate them, but I think there maybe some other ways that you can contribute to the bear cams, to this phenomenon of supporting national parks, certainly letting your members of Congress know that you love national parks, visiting national parks, if you have a park near your home, there's this Find Your Park initiative that's going on right now. You can search for that hashtag on Facebook and on Twitter, hashtag Find Your Park, and see what other people are doing. There's over 400 national park units throughout the United States. So you may be able to get out and volunteer at some of those places. Maybe it's just something as simple as picking up trash along a trail, helping to maintain a trail. Maybe they need some help staffing the visitor center. So there's a lot of different ways that you can help, not only Katmai National Park, but national parks and state parks and wildlands all across North America. So get out there, find your park. We definitely encourage you to do that. And maybe later this summer, I'm going to try to see how Katmai is your park. So we're going to try to use the Find Your Park hashtag and solicit maybe some some contributions from everybody on around the world watching the bear cams to let us know how Katmai is your park. So stay tuned for that. But definitely try to get out and volunteer. Find your park near your home. So 17th question here. Even without Ranger Roy, it seems like I'm right on par. So I must be talking an awful lot to answer each question. Roy and I usually answer about 20 questions. So 17th question here, can you describe what your normal days are like? Do you have a degree in biology? So my normal day, it's changed here over the time that I've worked here at Katmai. I started working here in 2000 to volunteer at Brooks River, and my day for the first several years of my work here happened to be standing on the wildlife viewing platforms, talking to people about bears, what we're seeing, interpreting the ecology of the area to everybody. So I would do that. That was a major portion of my duty. We also manage people around these high concentrations of bears, communicate a lot via radio, telling other rangers where the bears happen to be, what they're doing, their movement, so we can give bears space and let the public know what those bears are doing and help facilitate really great wildlife viewing opportunities for them. So that's a major component of our duties. I also would give programs. So we would give the Valley of 10,000 Smokes tour, an all-day bus tour to the site of the largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. We would do a walk about the human history, and we still do these things, but I would do a walk about the human history of the area. And then I would give an evening program, and my evening program was about salmon. So we would do these different programs throughout the day. Manage people up at Brooks Falls, to maintaining a wait list, giving people access to Brooks Falls. But then my duties have changed recently since I was hired to primarily work on the bear cams and on the website, write publications for the park. So that's what I do right now. I help to maybe give a little bit of technical support for the bear cams, but I'm been tasked in the summertime in July talking with people on the bear cams, and then in the wintertime getting ready for the summer season, and also getting our website up to speed, making sure that the information on there is accurate. So that's kind of what my day looks like. I work normally a 40-hour work week. The government only has so much money to pay me, so I just can't work 80 hours in a work week. There's not enough money in the budget for that. So it's about an 80-hour work week with me, most days 8 to 5. But there are days where I'll work in the evenings. There are days where I will work earlier in the morning. So that's what my normal day is. And I don't have a degree into biology. I have a degree in parks and recreation. I like to be a really well-rounded naturalist, so I read a lot of textbooks even today. If you want to be a ranger naturalist, you want to be an interpretive ranger. Those are kind of just two different terms for the same position. If you don't like studying, maybe this is not the right job for you, because I constantly have to read. I have to read up on the latest bear literature to make sure that I have accurate information to talk to people about the cams. People, you never know what I'm going to get asked. I get asked a lot of different things that I hadn't expected, and that's one of the best ways that I learn things, is people ask me questions I don't know the answer to, and then I have to go look it up. So I don't have a degree in biology, but I have a strong interest in biology. I hope I have a strong knowledge. I like to read about geology too, ecology, basically everything about the natural world. So I have to study quite a bit to keep my knowledge level up to speed. 18th question here, and it's almost 4 o'clock, so I'll try to answer the last 3 questions here before we call it a day. And I think my microphone batteries are going to last during that period. So how are you able to identify the bears so quickly? You identified beadnose from a long distance. How long does it take for you to become acquainted with these bears? And are you able to recognize the bears from season to season as they mature? It can be hard to identify bears the first time you're seeing them. My view, I can see a little bit better through the naked eye, I think, than the camera. A lot of the bears I'm recognizing by their face. You stare at them long enough, you start to see that they look very different from one another based on coat color, claw color. I'm also looking at them every day. Again, I'm up at the falls most evenings in July, bear watching, trying to get to know the different characteristics of the bears. So it's just like looking at a litter of dogs. If you have a litter of puppies, maybe they all look like at once, but as they grow and they mature and you get to know them and you're around them, you see not only physical differences but behavioral characteristics between the two of them. So those are the main way. It's a lot of time that has taken me to get good at identifying a lot of the Brooks River bears. A lot of practice, a lot of time, and noting not only their physical differences but their behavioral distances too. I also carry binoculars with me almost everywhere I go. So I'll look through my binoculars at bears in the distance to try to get a good idea of who they happen to be. I feel almost naked outside without binoculars. I use them for everything, not only watching bears, but watching salmon, watching different types of fish in the river, watching insects. You never know what you're going to use them for. It could be, so they're a very valuable tool for me. And recognizing the bears from season to season can be difficult because their coat colors do change. Bears tend to darken as the season continues. So they're shedding. A lot of them are shedding right now. And when their coats grow back in, they're going to be darker than what they had in the springtime and early summer. So that can be difficult. In September, when the bears first show up, sometimes I am scratching my head wondering, I'm not quite sure who that is. So that will happen commonly with me in September, and it takes maybe a few sightings before I can fully know who they happen to be. So it's a little bit harder to recognize them with some bears from season to season. Some of them, though, you can get to know really quickly, like bear 814 Lurch. He's missing his right ear, and he's the only bear in the river right now that we know of that's missing a right ear. So if you see a bear walking around with no right ear, you know that's him. So you can start with those bears that are easy to recognize and then start to work towards some of the others that maybe aren't as physically different than the others. So 19th question, would it be technologically possible in the future to post something like an attendance roster for the bears? It could list usual places with bears IDs moving on and off the list. Maybe, that would be something that I can sort of envision what you're thinking of, maybe like a map of the river and bears sighted here and there. Maybe that could be something that somebody has more computer programming skills than I might be able to set up, and it could be sort of a user-driven initiative. And if you're watching the cams, you recognize 409 here at the mouth of the river, then you can note the bear, the date, and the time. I think that might be an interesting idea. I think it's certainly possible. I don't have the technical skills to do that, however. So maybe that's something for a few smart people out there to figure out. That would be kind of interesting. A map of the falls, for instance, noting the time that we see certain bears there, the date that we see certain bears there. I think that's an interesting idea. So we'll have to put some thought into that. And last question, when's the best time of the year to see the most bears? Depends on maybe what you want to see the bears doing. If you want to see bears in Katmai in the springtime, so let's say June, especially early June, don't come to Brooks River. We might have a few bears wandering through, but there's no salmon here or really any other concentrated food sources in the beginning of June to attract bears into this area. So we might have a couple wandering through, but early June, the first, for the most part, 3 weeks of June can be tough sledding for bear watchers here because there's just not a whole lot of bears around. From the last week of June, that can be a good time to come. There might be not a lot of bears around on a consistent basis, but there are bears here looking to see if any salmon are here. So late June is the start of the time where we begin to see more and more bears coming back to Brooks River. If you want to see bears catching fish at the waterfall, try to time your visit for the first 3 weeks of July to Brooks River. End of July, you can still see bears here, but it might be a little iffy. Last year, like I mentioned at the beginning of our video chat, there wasn't a whole lot of bears fishing on this day last July. So we have a little bit more bear activity today versus this day last year. So bears begin to disperse at this time of the year. August, usually we have a dearth of bears. So not a whole lot of bears here during the month of August. A few start to arrive the last few days of August. September, though, is a great time of the year to watch bears at Brooks River. They're not really fishing on a regular basis up at Brooks Falls, but we have most of our bears down in the mouth of the Brooks River, and it looks like 409, she's still behind me just off of that spit of gravel. So she'll be doing that. in September and October. September is a great time of the year, but the lodge and the visitor facilities here close on September 18th. So the last night you can stay in the lodge is September 18th. But September is a great time of the year to come to Brooks River to see bears. And it's a little bit after 4 o'clock, and I got to just about 20 questions or so. I hope to do more of these live chats. As throughout August and into September, I'll be chatting in the comments on explore.org from time to time. So look for me there, and I'll do my best to answer those questions. I am going to take the next week off to do a backpacking trip and get lost. I'm not going to tell you where I'm going, but I'm going to get lost out there and have some fun, get some alone time over the next week. So I won't be online over the next week, but Ranger Roy, he might be able to drop in from time to time. Ranger Gene, look for those two people to chat in the comments section. And during the month of August, when I do come back, we might do a live chat from the top of Dumpling Mountain over here. We might try to do a live chat from the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, too, to answer your questions about different things that we have here in Katmai, because we not only have bears, but we have a lot of other things that make Katmai a very significant place. A wilderness landscape, a cultural landscape, a volcanic landscape. So maybe we're going to try to do some chats in August about those things. And then in September, we'll be back at it on Bear Cam quite a lot to talk about the different bears that we have here and their behavior. So I'm glad that everyone could join me this afternoon, and look for me to be back online in a week or so. Look for Ranger Roy, Ranger Gene to answer your questions in the meantime. We'll have the cams running as long as possible this year, hopefully into throughout the winter time. But I'll be back online soon, and enjoy the bears in the meantime. Thanks for joining me. Have a good day.
Corner platform. Pointer.